Right, welcome. Let's officially start the Patterson-Gimlin 40th anniversary celebration, the Patterson-Gimlin film. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. My name is Tom Yamra, and on behalf of our organizing committee, Joyce Kearney and Scott McLean, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. Thank you. Very historic day, and I think our celebration is most appropriate to get together and celebrate the film, and most importantly honor the men who made the film. And starting back in 1958, Jerry Crew got things started around here, so I'm going to start the day with a song called Jerry Crew. Later I picked up my paper last Monday Eve, saw a picture on the front page I just couldn't believe. A serious man holding a giant for cast. The news of this image was bound to spread fast. Well, who was this man who brought this image to us? His friends and his family say he's a guy they could trust. He saw some things on Bluff Creek that he couldn't explain. Now he's all over the front page. What was his name? Jerry Crew. He knew what to do. Jerry, 'cause he knew what to do. Yeah, he knew what to do. Like he would show up for work and find these tracks near his cat. Well, people sometimes prank them, but this wasn't that. Now these were much deeper and they roamed far and wide. He couldn't match the depth or the 16-inch drive. Well, he told his friend Bob about these strange prints. Bob showed him how to mix plaster to capture the and the dents. Bring out a cast, and then we can see what kind of creature you got there and solve this mystery. Jerry Crew, he knew what to do. Yeah, Jerry Crew, those who believed him were but a few. That didn't stop Jerry, 'cause he knew what to do. To his friends, when one he did say, let's go Trogan's old, you put it next to his poop. He says, that's the new Sasquatch, we'll call it Bigfoot. Wasn't the first that we heard of this lore. There was new stories about it that had been written before. Jerry's picture went worldwide and his story was told. There was a big hairy man in the woods of Humboldt. Jerry Crew, he knew what to do. Stop Jerry, 'cause he knew what to do. Yeah, he knew what to do. Well, Ray Wallace said he did it, but he's a known liar. If he could make a buck, he'd set his equipment on fire. All of them tracks could be made by his clan. No, there's an animal out there who just eludes man. Well, now we know of that film that came off that track that Jerry Crew was constructed, and the creatures all black. Yeah, Gimlin and Patterson gave the world a good view, but it's nice to thank Jerry, 'cause he knew what to do. Jerry Crew, he knew what to do. Jerry Crew, those who believed him were but a few. That didn't stop Jerry, he knew what to do. Thank you very much. And we'd like to start the event today with our keynote speaker, Daniel Perez. Daniel is the publisher and author of the Bigfoot Times, and also the author of Bigfoot at Bluff Creek. He's been investigating this phenomenon for close to 30 years or more, and we're excited and pleased to have him with us today. So ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Perez.
Good afternoon. It's a small crowd, but that's okay. Just give me a minute to collect my thoughts so we can get going here. First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, because every time someone speaks, they might talk about a topic, but they said, well, what about this individual? What about, where's he from? What does he do, etc. Born and raised in Norwalk, California, age 44. I'm a union licensed electrician, and I've been doing that since 1985. About 1973, with my brother and sister, I saw a movie at the theater called The Legend of Boggy Creek. You may have seen that as well. That movie sucked me in to what we call unknown primates, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, call them what you will. And I've been interested ever since. The only difference between me and other people that are now my age is that I stuck with it and they moved on to other areas. Today we're going to specifically be talking about the Patterson-Gimlin film, shot 40 years ago to date. And in fact, the weather conditions today are perhaps quite similar to what they were back then. And I thought about taking an outline for my talk to go over 40 years of the film, and I said, well, no, why don't we just be all over the map like I usually am? And for those of you who've sat and had dinner or breakfast with me, I'll jump from subject to subject in a moment, just in a heartbeat. And so there's a lot of things I want to cover with you. And to the best of my understanding, Tom, I have 1 hour time.
Correct.
So what I'm going to try to do is take the 50 minutes of that time, discuss some of the high points of the movie. The last 10 minutes I'm going to reserve for questions. I want to direct your attention first to that side over there. To my understanding, Scott McLean put those newspaper clippings up, historical newspaper clippings, and it gives you a good perspective of what took place when, and it kind of gets you, fills in the dates and stuff. Right over here on this clipboard, if I could move and if you could still hear me, I hope that's okay.
Take the microphone.
Take the microphone. I just want to direct your attention over here. David Murphy from Whittier, California, was the first researcher to get a photo of the actual truck. We've all read a lot about the subject matter, about what happened, and most of us have a rough idea as to what happened on that historic day in Bluff Creek. But this is the truck that went down there and made that historic trip. It was in 1967. To the best of my knowledge, Bob bought this truck in 1965, so it was relatively new. You could read a little bit more about the truck in the latest edition of the Bigfoot Times. Let me get back to myself. In about 10 years ago, I started, January of 1998, I started publishing a newsletter called the Bigfoot Times. And this January it'll be 10 years. And since I started, we have roughly 703 paid subscribers worldwide. They asked me, in fact, they asked me this morning, Dave Murphy, he says, well, where do these people come from? And I said, I don't know. I don't really advertise, but somehow they find out that there's a newsletter, and it's just, they either send a check in the mail, or you get one of those email PayPal notices. So that's how that, I think we've lost.
Yeah.
I think I can still talk though with everyone hearing me.
Yeah. You just flash that.
Like I said, I'm going to be all over the map. If something comes to mind, I'm just going to talk about it. When the late Roger Patterson, who died January 15th of 1972, less than 5 years after the famous movie was shot, This is the same type of camera that was used. It's a Kodak K100 movie camera that takes 16mm film. It's not a digital camera. This was before the digital era. The only difference between this camera, which I'm going to pass around so all of you can inspect it carefully, is this has a turret lens, meaning the turret, the 3 lenses up front. There's actually 6 lenses. One is the viewfinder, the other is the lens. The only difference between this and what Roger Patterson had is he had a fixed lens. There was only one lens and there was only one viewfinder. That's the difference. This is the camera he used to collect his famous movie. Another thing too that's interesting about this camera, the mechanics of it, is on this dial. I think I can talk loud enough and have you people hear me, is that once you, under the heat of the conditions on a sandbar with an unknown subject, naturally you might be concerned for your safety. But with this camera, if you press the trigger all the way, it's hands-free operation. Roger Patterson got in trouble for renting the camera, I believe it was from Shepard's Camera Shop in Yakima, and he failed to return it, and there was a warrant for his arrest. Okay? So let's, how can I say it? Roger wasn't exactly the most squeaky clean person out there, but regardless, he did have some trouble getting the camera back, and there was a warrant for his arrest, and I believe it was all resolved. But one of the differences here is what came out in the, I guess it was the police report, and Peter Byrne, a Bigfoot investigator, was the person that, in the police report, which I got a copy of, the difference is when Roger had that camera, this camera was set up with a pistol grip, meaning on the bottom here, you could hold it here. And so if you look at the movie film, which we're going to take a look at, that gave you the opportunity to run so you could have one hand on the camera, the trigger fully depressed. We don't know whether that was the case or not, but that may have been how he got his movie footage, by pressing the trigger all the way down, his hand on the pistol grip, and running towards the subject. And so you'll feel how heavy this camera is. I want you to feel the weight of this camera. You say like, wow, you could realize what an extraordinary event happened within that minute when he got his movie footage. So I'm about done with this camera. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, about the filming speed and the film speed dial that's seen on this camera. On the 25th anniversary of the Patterson-Gimlin film, I can't believe how time flies by so quick. I called up the late Renee DeHinden, the principal investigator of the Patterson-Gimlin film, and I said, well, wouldn't it be neat to kind of do something on the 25th anniversary? This was in 1992, to the best of my knowledge, there was maybe, I don't think there was any annual Bigfoot meets countrywide. There may have been 1 or 2, but they weren't on an annual basis. And so I told Renee, I said, well, I wanted to do like maybe a little booklet or something, and this is Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, which was released on the 25th anniversary of the film. And in 1999, Renee DeHinden, at a conference, paid to me the best compliment I ever heard. We were standing in the auditorium, not the auditorium, but the back portion of the auditorium, and some people were listening to him. And I just happened to have a copy of this, and he goes, it's the best damn thing ever published on the film. And I just said, well, I'll take that to the bank. Today, in honor of that famous movie that was shot in 1967, these are going to be on sale for everyone, 1 copy per customer, 67 cents each.
Wow.
This is the 2nd edition The only thing that's different with the second edition and the first edition, it has an extensive bibliography in the back. There's about 8 pages of specific bibliography about newspaper clippings and books that were published with regard to the famous movie. Stuff that is rehashed material by junk authors is just not cited because they're just taking their information and copying from other people. So when you have a bibliography in the work, it turns it from a popular piece of literature to a scholarly piece of literature, where historians and people who are schooled in the subject who want to do further research, it's all here. As we were talking about the movie camera that was used, and as you can see, it's quite heavy, and you could just put yourself in the same place he was, regardless of whether this movie was fake or real. That's not the point right now. You get on the sandbar, and many of you have been to that location, and try to get your own movie of a man in a costume under those circumstances. I'm going to pass out for you also. This is a roll of 16mm film. This is a 100-foot roll. I'm going to pass it out so you can see exactly what 16mm film is. Today, we're so accustomed to digital cameras, so we don't really get to see the actual film. You know, we just have digital information that goes from one point to the other through a cable, and that's it. So you get to see how wide the frames are. And in these frames, you could get a good size image. And although the subject in the image is quite small compared to the entire frame, it is remarkably quite clear. So I'm going to pass this around. Now, before I go on, and I've been doing this for many, many years, over 25 now, on a very steady, continuous basis. I like to read a lot. I'm somewhat well-versed in anthropology, somewhat well-versed in science. What I would like to say, and to emphasize this point, and that's why I'm so glad that all of you are here. This famous movie, in my view, and think about this for a moment, of all the things that have ever been done in all of anthropology and archaeology, famous digs, fossils, Lucy, the small The Hobbit, there you go. This discovery, etc. And all these exciting paleoanthropological discoveries in the past. This is, even though this is on the fringe of everything and not fully accepted, this is the single biggest anthropological discovery of all time. And there's very few people today from the world of science who are willing to participate in taking a hard look at this movie film. And that's why one of the reasons I've continued on, and one of the reasons why I continued on in terms of like maybe focusing more on the Patterson-Gimlin film than other reports, is that one of my mentors, the late Rene de Hinden, seemed to emphasize this every time a word came out of his mouth. The last time I saw him, he was in Richmond at his home at the Vancouver Gun Club, and to the best of my memory, a fellow by the name of Dave Hales, who came up, was with me, and we wanted to take in the Bouchard Gardens on Victoria on the Vancouver Island. So we spent the whole day there. We came back, and this was quite late. And so Rene had this kind of like shed area where he, you know, it was his office office, his kitchen, the whole 9 yards. And he's up. It's almost like a dad had waited up for you after a party or something. And he had been to the Bouchard Gardens. That's why he didn't go that time. And he just says, oh, well, how was it? And I said, oh, it was nice, you know. And so the next thing out of his mouth, he continues on, almost without breaking stride from an earlier conversation that day about the Patterson-Gimlin film, emphasizing to me that, you know, I guess he realized then that his time was limited, which of course he was right. He died April of 2001. He just emphasized to me that this was important and to carry on. And then one thing that caught me, he goes, you know why I did all this damn work on the movie film? And then he goes like this, he goes, because I wanted to know. Because I wanted to know. Now, what if we can we actually show the movie? I want to show the movie in real time. It lasts about 1 minute. And then what we're going to do is we're going to review that movie and show it in slow motion to show some of the detail.
Once you come over, Tom, get a movie on this. I didn't have that.
Testing. I'm back. And like I said, we're going to be all over the map. Something just came to mind before they were loading up the famous movie. And this copy, according to Doug Hychak, who was the producer of Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, this copy either comes directly from, this is a copy made in high definition from either Pat Patterson or John Green, who to date have the best copies of the movie film.
I don't think it's going to help much, actually.
You can't fake that. No way. That's a decoy. Where's the other ones?
And when I said that this is the single biggest anthropological discovery of all time, you may think I've overemphasized that point. But think about this. Here, scientists are looking at the Hobbit or Lucy. That's a fossil that is dead thousands of years. This thing here, a dinosaur itself, still living. Living at the very moment that film was shot. Are we seeing it in real time?
Hello? Hello? I can't see it.
Yes, I wasn't ready for this, actually.
Okay, what you see are the film sprockets from the film. But one thing about this movie film that was pointed out to me, when Doug Hychak reshot this film, he cropped out a lot of the background. And so it looks like the subject is larger. It's pulled forward in the screen. Some of the background is missing. And that was to get a tighter view of the subject.
Next sequence.
Don't explain what's going on. What we have here is the additional features from the DVD Sasquatch, The Legend Meets Science, which Doug Hychek was nice enough to allow us to show at this event with his permission, White Wolf Entertainment. And there's several sequences where he loops over and over showing you the clear muscle movements or this hernia and the quadricep. And we'd like to get to there's two of the additional features that show the film, normal speed and slow down speed zoomed in. And if we can switch between chapters, we'll get there. Otherwise, we're now looping through the
Well, it's my club.
hernia.
I don't think it's separated into chapters. It runs as one.
I did it at home.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. I split it up at home. Yeah.
Right.
All right, kids.
Okay, maybe we could come back to watching the movie film.
The slides is
Most of us have seen, we can go to the slides. But before we go to the slides, I did want to discuss what happened immediately after that famous movie was shot. There is a story. Let me hand out. I think what I'm going to do is just hand out this board so you can see it up close. This was done by Jeff Lichtman, a forensic scientist, and this is a compilation. What you see in this frame is the subject superimposed time after time after time again in different frames. What you have here is Al Hodgson, a resident of Willow Creek, his son, here for scale. To the best of my knowledge, he's 6 feet tall. I met him one time in December of 1995, I believe. But I'll pass this around. This study of the movie film that was commissioned by the Bigfoot Research Project, which was Peter Byrne at the time, approximately 1996, 1997, was at a cost of $75,000 to do this work. Essentially, what that report, what Jeff Lichtman returned to Peter Byrne in terms of results, is that at the present time, this film cannot be demonstrated to be a forgery. That was the essence of the report. And this is one of the things that they did with that famous movie, and I'll pass it around so you could all have a look. Now let's go October 20th at approximately 1:30 or 1:20, no later than 1:40 in the afternoon. Again, we're thinking about Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. And so okay, if Roger or Bob told the Eureka Time Standard that night that the film was shot at that time, the question is, how would you verify that information? And a fellow by the name of the late Rene Hinden, who had probably been to the film site more times than anyone else, not just to go, but for specific studies. And we discussed it one time, and he says, you know how you could tell when that film was shot? He says, you just take pictures of that. You could only do it a few years after the film was shot by watching how the shadows are from the sunlight at certain times of the day. And that's exactly what Rene Hinden did. And so he had a window. He says that film was shot as early as 1:20 and as late as 1:40. After that, it doesn't fit with the shadows that were cast on that sandbar by the sun. And so that was one of the pieces of work that the late Rene Hinden did on the famous movie, because Roger and Bob had made the statement that it was shot at approximately 1:30. So Rene doubled back, trying to verify that information. So let's advance up to November 5th, 1967, which to the best of my memory was Sunday. At that time, the fellow that carved the Willow Creek statue that you see right around the corner, the very famous statue, Jim McLaren, at the time he was a student in Arcata to the best of my knowledge, it was called Humboldt College then. I think it's since been changed to Humboldt State University, and I think it was shortly thereafter. But he was a student at the university, and they wanted to go up and take a look at the film site. I don't have any slides of Jim McLaren, but Jim McLaren was a tall, lanky fellow. In fact, I think I do. We're going to go back. But on November 5th, 1967, a fellow, a Willow Creek resident who's still living, I'm not sure if he's going to be here or not, by the name of Richard Henry, drove his vehicle with Jim McLaren to the film site. And they had a rough idea where it was. Believe it or not, at that time, according to Richard Henry, you could literally drive right up to the film site. Most people don't realize that. There was a road that was put in there called the Bluff Creek Road, which is now gone, that paralleled the creek. For the many people who got involved in the actual field studies of going out to the film site in the late 90s and 2000 and beyond, they said, well, you could only get down there by foot. Back then, you could drive. Richard Henry told me that you could literally, he said, had I had a four-wheel drive, I could literally drive across that creek and directly onto the film site. So there was another fellow who's probably deceased by the name of Bob Barnett, who was a radio personality. November 5th, 1967 was the first movie that Richard Henry shot of Jim McLaren. What Jim McLaren did was he walked adjacent to the tracks that were left behind, similar to another movie. That movie film you've never seen, I've never seen. I communicated with Jim McLaren about 2003. He told me he turned that movie film over to the researcher in Maine, Lauren Coleman. Lauren Coleman wrote to me something to the effect that if I have it, I do not know where that film was shot. So let's advance to June of 1968. This is a film that John Green shot of Jim McLaren. And this is the film that you may have seen on television. Again, it's Jim McLaren as the movie star walking adjacent to the tracks. So you're basically saying Jim McLaren in the same pathway as the subject was. And I may have something on my slide presentation, but at the time Jim McLaren was 6 feet 5 inches tall. He's quite a tall individual, but a very slender individual. I think he weighed 165. And when you see Jim McLaren compared to the subject, I think I lost my... It's like night and day. So let's talk about, just briefly, about the original movie film. What had happened is, shortly after that film was made, shortly after the movie film was made, Ron Olson and their company called American National Enterprises, which was owned by Ron Olson's father to the best of my memory, they wanted to do a documentary on the film. And this is shortly before Roger died. And so Roger made the mistake of loaning out the original movie to American National Enterprises, which eventually went into bankruptcy or dissolved. To make a long story short, from that point, that original movie film of the subject basically disappeared. The last I heard from some people is that the film is with an attorney in Florida and that Pat Patterson knows the exact whereabouts. It would be interesting to have the original film to do a lot of more work that, because of computer technology and technology in general, that you could ask different questions that maybe you couldn't ask a long time ago. That same day, October 20th, 1967, Roger and Bob, the first roll of film, the subject is the tail end, the last 952 frames of the 100-foot roll. Then, the subject is literally in the last frame, it trails off. Roger put a second roll of film in his camera, and he and Bob Gimlin documented the tracks that were on the sandbar. And so what had happened, according to what I heard from researcher Chris Murphy in Canada, is that Pat Patterson, again, another mistake, so you'll know never to loan originals, loaned the second roll of film of the tracks in the ground to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. And apparently there are papers to the effect that that's where it went, and I want to say that was around 1975. They never got the movie film back. So the first movie film is gone of the subject. The second movie film of the tracks is essentially elsewhere. You can't see it. The very first movie film that was made November 5th, 1967 of Jim McLaren disappeared. The only one that's intact and still with its owner is the one that John Green shot in June of 1968. And he told me, he says, doggone it, he said, I should have made that film at the same, waited till October of 1968, so the foliage is the same. And he says, that's the only mistake I made. Now, like I said, we're going to be jumping back and forth because things pop into my mind. They just told me I've got 15 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun. That's okay, we can cover it. Had this movie film been shot, say there's Bank of America, and all of a sudden a guy flees from the building and they have video surveillance, and say for whatever reason it had just rained and some mud had slid onto the road and he left his boot tracks or shoe prints on the ground, and later forensic people from the police came and analyzed it and checked it out. The circumstances, if it were a man fleeing a bank who had just robbed it, the video film, the tracks on the ground, would be considered evidence. So I look at the Patterson-Gimlin film and I'm saying, well, we've got the same thing. You can't have a double standard. I've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to compress things. Like I said, I'm going to jump around. In 1989, two scientists by the name of Fleischmann and Pons got world attention because they said they could do cold fusion. So every other scientist, this would solve the world's energy problems in a heartbeat. Every other scientist wanted to see if they could replicate that discovery, cold fusion. Nobody could. Are you with me?
Yes.
They stated that they could do cold fusion. So they said, well, if they can do it, another team of scientists from elsewhere should be able to do it. Nobody could do it. So let me ask you this question. If this famous movie is fake, a man in a costume, and according to author Greg Long, the author of The Making of Bigfoot, they've got the person who did it, a man by the name of Bob Hieronymus. So if this famous movie is fake, 40 years later, or even in between, why has no one been able to duplicate it? And I just gave you the example of Fleischmann and Pons. The whole essence of science in the scientific community is being able to duplicate it. So if someone were able to duplicate that movie film, I would say we probably have a man running around in a costume. No one has. What you see in that movie film on close inspection is muscles that ripple. You see muscle expansion and contraction. Had that been a suit, it would conceal the muscles as opposed to reveal them. Keep that in mind. Now, because of my compressed time frame, we're just going to run through the slides, so in other words, we actually get to see them. This is, go back one. This is October 20th, 2006. Some of you were there September of 2003. They had a big storm, and this is opposite of the creek, so the subject would have been over here, but here's the creek, and it just ripped through with the big storm, and this turned into a little island, this portion, and part of the creek comes down here. I shot this, myself and Richard Henry went down there and I did an interview with him. He's 74, 75, 76, so I realized he wasn't going to be around forever, so I did the interview. Next frame. For those of you who know anything about surveying, this is what the late Rene Hinden did. All of these triangulation measurements from his master, the trees and everything. So had it not been for the late Rene Hinden, who recycled lead shot at the Vancouver Gun Club for less than poverty wages, we wouldn't have all of this information. We wouldn't know as much numerical information as we have had it not been for him. And he did this on his own dime. A guy that had very little money. Next one. This is Jim McLaren. This is the subject. This is what Rene Hinden retrieved from the film site, and this is a piece of wood. And it's from this piece of wood. This is Jim McLaren in John Green's film. This is the actual film. This is a piece of wood, not a branch, a piece of wood that Rene Hinden collected. The subject, according to Rene Hinden, either comes directly in the same plane as that piece of wood, or actually hits that piece of wood, causing it to move. Around 1972, Rene Hinden, when he was at the film site taking pictures, decided, he said, wow, that's interesting, it's at the same place where it was when it was shot, the movie film, I'll go pick it up as a souvenir. And it's from that piece of wood with a known measurement of about 23 inches that it's in the same identical area as the subject. If you back this up, it's even tighter, that they were able to deduce that this subject here is about 88 inches tall, meaning it's about 7 feet 4 inches tall. Very unlikely to be a man in a suit at that height. One of the things that John Green pointed out was the IM index, and that was about 2004, the intermittent index. Myself, compared to an ape and chimpanzee, my ratio of my arms and my legs are different from them. This subject has an IM index different from man. So again, Green brought that up, and it's just like the IM index is different than what you would have in a man in a costume. And a lot of people say, well, it's just a man in a costume with extended arms. Well, then you have to ask the question, how do you move the hands, which you could see moving in the movie film? Let's move on. This was shot about 1972. This is Peter Burns' picture. This is approximately frame 352, which is right there. This is a ruler, and they were just getting information as to how tall a reference point. If you look here, these are trees that have been cut down. So in this area, they were doing logging. It wasn't entirely remote. Let's continue on. A man in a costume. And when you see people in costumes, right away, there's no doubt. So that's why I put some of this stuff in my presentation. Let's go on. Again, a man in a costume, and it just doesn't have the look and feel of reality. It has the look and feel of a man in a costume. And these apparently are some of the best people that do the stuff, and this is down in Los Angeles. Let's move on. Again, let's go back real quick. And you see this, you almost get the impression they're intentionally trying to mimic the movie film. And it's lifeless. It's completely lifeless. You don't see anything that would... Let me ask you, if anyone shot this, if you didn't see the head, would you think this is reality or just a man in a costume? It's so pathetically obvious. And I put these up there to kind of show you, to give you examples. The BBC did this. And here's another example, and this is perhaps a little more distant, but again, you don't have nearly the bulk that you see in that subject. And say, for instance, for the sake of argument, if it were a man in a costume and they bulked him up, you would not see the muscle expansion and contraction that you see in the movie film.
It's a woman, it would have to be a woman in a costume.
There, okay. Let's move on. This is from the $6 Million Man. This is what they did back then. Again, a man in a costume. And this is the board that I passed out to you. Again, this was the Bigfoot Research Project. Here is Michael. I want to say this is Michael Hodgson. Al Hodgson has 2 sons. Not only, he's approximately in frame 352. The subject is advancing on him, and you can see the frame numbers here, but maybe not here. But you can see how bigger the subject is compared to a man. And here in profile, when actually if I'm standing this way, I would be wider than when I'm standing this way. This thing is in profile, and it makes him look like a stick. And so this is some of the comparative work that was done. Let's move on. This is Bob Gimlin. I guess this is the summer of 2007. I spoke with him October 12th of this year. And again, as the late Renee Hinden said about his character, and he had things that you could memorize easy because he didn't speak long sentences. He just said little blurts and pieces. He just said he was straight down the line. And he said his story never changed. And so Gimlin is a very good witness. Roger was there with the movie camera just documenting what had taken place. Let's go on. I shot this September 11th of 2003 right here in Willow Creek at the Bigfoot Museum. This is the night before they had the International Bigfoot Symposium, and that's Bob Gimlin. And this was the second time Bob Gimlin had ever been to Willow Creek and been down to the film site. To the best of my knowledge, he's only been to the film site 2 times. The second time, he could not even recognize the place. Are there more slides? M.K. Davis from Mississippi, and many of you have probably been on a site called Bigfoot Forums. He puts a lot of his information up on Bigfoot Forums. But as far as I'm concerned, M.K. Davis, for actually studying the subject in the movie film, has done some of the best work ever. Go on. This is some of his work right here, and I'll explain it in brief. Right around 1979, the only reference to it, I think, is from Texas in a newspaper when Renee Hinden was there. He said, we cannot tie the movie subject with the tracks that were later found in the sandbar. So in other words, if it were a criminal case, you'd say, well, maybe the tracks are separate from the subject. M.K. Davis, some 30 years later, was able to show, here's the subject in some of the early frames. Can you see this as a reference? So you know, even though this is black, we're at roughly the same frame. The subject has now advanced beyond this point, and he's exactly right here. And you can see that's where that subject left that track. This was M.K. Davis's work, and this is huge in my opinion. So now you can tie the subject to the tracks. Let's move on. This is before. This is September up on Blue Creek Mountain, the 15-inch tracks. This is just before the famous movie film. Green and DeHinden were down to investigate the tracks that were seen on Blue Creek Mountain. This is one of them. That's John Green. Continue on. This is Lyle Laverty, who I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he's got one of the highest positions now with the United States Forest Service. The reason why he's important, he was camped in Louse Camp with about 5 other people, October 19th and 20th, when that famous movie was shot. According to Dr. Meldrum, Louse Camp is just a few miles away from the famous movie site. A very credible individual. According to Dr. Meldrum, on Monday, October 23rd, the film was shot Friday, October 20th. Monday, they were back at the location, and somehow I interviewed Lyle Laverty in 1991 or 1992. And he says, I don't remember how we found out about the tracks, but somehow we found out about the tracks. And he went and took photographs of the tracks in the sandbar. And a lot of people say, well, I have a problem with the tracks in the sandbar, that they would have been washed away because there was a heavy rain right after the movie film was shot. Most people maybe forget to realize that after the film was shot, Bob Gimlin went back to the film site and put cardboard over the tracks. And he realized the cardboard was getting all soggy. And so he started ripping bark off the trees. And he put bark over the trees so people would later come back and to study the tracks. Lyle Laverty was one of the people that saw the tracks and photographed the tracks. Has nothing to do with Bigfoot, period. He's just a guy in the area. What he did say to me that is interesting, though, he said, we were there all summer long in preparation for timber sales, and we never saw anything. And he says, all of a sudden, Mr. Patterson comes in, and boom, he gets a film. He says, well, he says, I do have a little bit of reservation, but that's all he said. And he did take the photos of the tracks. So here's an independent party. In late October, Bob Titmus came to the film site after seeing the movie film and made a series of 10 consecutive plaster casts. And they are right here, the originals, at the Bluff Creek Museum, at the Willow Creek Museum, excuse me. And the reason why they're so thin is because he didn't have that much plaster of Paris casting. I think I'm being forced to cut down. I've got a few minutes.
The lights.
I will pass this around too. For those of you who do not have the opportunity to go down to the film site yourself, this is some of the sand that is from the Bluff Creek film site, the famous Patterson-Gimlin. And when you take a picture of this actual film site, it comes out a little bit blue, and the reason for that is it has the mineral serpentine in it. The Forest Service calls it blue goo. It's a mineral called serpentine. So I'll pass this around so you can have a look. Am I out of time?
At 11, we start your question and answer period for 10 minutes.
So how many minutes do I have?
About 2.
Okay, I've got 2 minutes. So let's just proceed with an experiment. Who's the tallest person here? I think I saw him standing. No, there was another person I thought that was taller.
Scott.
Immediately after that film was shot, there were various people that interviewed both Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. And they stated that the subject left tracks that were 42 inches long. Now the difference here's the difference here. They said it was, a step is from right to left, okay? A stride is the full oscillation. A lot of people interchange the two, but let's not get confused. The steps that were left were approximately 42 inches long when the subject was being filmed. And that 42 inches it varied from 40 to 42. How tall are you?
6'4".
About 6'4". I didn't put tape on the floor, but there's 42 inches. And if you could walk for me, and when you get to this point, pretend that's your takeoff point, expand your stride, expand your step, so you could cover that distance. And let the audience have a look.
It's gonna run, they'll make it.
And one more time. Okay, thank you. So we've seen the movie film, and nowhere in the movie film does it look like you see that type of exaggeration. So here this subject is making tracks very comfortably. There it is in the process of making a step right there. Dr. Henner Fehrenbach did some calculations on the speed of the subject. He's up in Oregon, he's now retired, but he stated something to the effect that if we were to follow directly in her footsteps, we would have to assume a little bit of a jog walk to keep up. This thing, although it looked like it was just walking, was covering a lot of real estate real fast. I think I'm out of time, so let's right now go to questions. And I wanted to use the board a little bit, but I didn't have the opportunity. Let's. This plaster of Paris casting was shot by Lyle Laverty from the Forest Service, and it shows apparently a mid-tarsal break. Dr. Jeff Meldrum from Idaho State University was one of the first people to correctly tell us what this was, because prior to that, myself, John Green, Renee DeHinden, all felt the reason you see this is because in that particular frame where they shot it, it looked like it stepped on a branch. Therefore, the foot was going over it, but that is not the case. This is the biomechanical action of the foot itself. There are other tracks that have seen it in the Pacific Northwest that have this similar characteristic. Let's move on. I'm not sure of the artist, but every time I see this close-up, I get the feel that this might be a good representation of a close-up of the face of the subject. I think now, because of time, I'm going to have to cut it short and go directly to Q&A. And this is, again, when that movie film was mailed or airshipped, probably from Murray Field, which is just north of Eureka, California, it had to go 437 miles to Yakima, Washington. The researcher Chris Murphy from Canada provided this information for me. This is, I guess, from Google. This is Murray Field, just north of Eureka, California. And to the best, remember, this is the first time Bob Gimlin had ever been in that area. And he was just basically the taxi cab driver for Roger Patterson. And he made a general statement. He says, well, I remember being at an airport, but I'm not exactly sure. It was a lot of things going on, and he was tired after the film was shot. And this might be the likely venue that the film was airshipped, private delivery from Northern California to Yakima to Al the Atlee, who was Roger Patterson's brother-in-law. Is there another frame? Again, this is the piece of wood that Renee DeHinden collected. And this is the piece of wood seen in the frame. Chris Murphy did this work, basically circled the piece of wood, scaled it next to the subject, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you do the math, it comes up to about 87.5 inches or 88 inches, which gives you an idea that the subject was about 7'3.5" or 7 feet 4 inches tall.
Cool.
And again, this is the work that Jeff Blickman did. This is Al Hodgson's son. I want to say this is Michael Hodgson.
Right.
Oh, that is my foot, summer 2001. The Bluff Creek is right here. Let's go back. It's hard to see. There's my naked foot. Go to the next one. There's my foot. What I did, I put my foot in the creek, and then I started walking away. Go to the next one. Within 2 steps, all the sand, all the surface that was there fell off my foot. So when you see the subject, and we've all seen frames 61 and 72, when you see the backside of the foot, and it's extremely light and gray, and a lot of people say, well, it's got the sand on its feet. I disagree. What you see is what you get. If that sand is falling off of my feet at that rate, I'm assuming this other primate is no different than me on the bottom of its feet. And if it were even in the water, that sand would come off, because we did experimentation at that site. And it was immediate. This just gives you a scale. This is Rene Hinden's shot from about 1972. And this is taken up on the hill. The big tree, which you see here, is actually right back here. Chris Murphy did all of this work in terms of putting the arrows and the scale. Let's move on. Richard Henry drew this map from memory. This was October 2004. I asked him to do this. And this is his recollection. He said there was no question that something had happened here. He drew where the tracks were, how the creek was, and everything. He was there with Jim McLaren, November 5th, 1967. And he just said to me, he said, well, if they fake this, I can't figure out how they did it. And he saw those firsthand. He's a primary witness. He was there just days after the famous movie was shot. This is Roger Knights from Seattle, Washington. Roger Knights has almost single-handedly kicked butt on Greg Long and Bob Hieronymus and their various claims for Bob Hieronymus as the man in the suit. I've got a copy of the newsletter here, the Bigfoot Times, and you don't even need Greg Long to discredit the story. You could just take Bob Hieronymus, because he's opened his mouth so many times. He says one thing at one time and something else at another time. He doesn't even have, he said, well, off the blacktop we went 3 or 4 miles, and that's not, to get off the blacktop to the film site, it's more than 20 miles. And it's that type of discrepancy that, all of these discrepancies that Roger Knights has really focused on, has done a tremendous job. So just, the man in the suit just does not work, and he's done a lot of work there. This is John Green. This was shot at the International Bigfoot Symposium right up the road, September of 2003. He has done a tremendous amount of work on the film and Bigfoot in general. It's just unfortunate that both him and DeHinden were in Northern California, August, September 2003, up on Blue Creek Mountain. They go home. At that time, let me see, I may have difficulty in this, but Al Hodgson had phoned up to Roger Patterson's home about the tracks, and Roger Patterson was away, and he left a message with Pat Patterson that there were tracks down in Northern California. And so September went by, and Bob and Roger were able to make it down in October, and instead of getting film footage of the tracks in the ground, they got the actual filmmaker. There has been various debate about the film speed setting. The camera I've got, that's the speed dial, and I've been told I've got to cut it short here, but basically, to make a long story short, 16 frames per second is approximately what that film is shot at. The reason for that, on the 100-foot roll, prior to the famous movie, there is the known animals, horses. So when you run it at 18 or 24 frames per second, it just doesn't look right. It's a little bit too fast. You slow the horse sequence down prior to the movie film down to approximately 16 frames per second, same strip of film, you've hit it on the head. More than likely, that film was shot at 16 frames per second. That is Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, on sale today for 67 cents. This is Bob Gimlin, so you get a feel for how tall he is compared to Tom Yamarone. And this is Bobo, and I think they're both here today. Again, you've seen that before. That's basically it. Let's go directly to questions.
We're done. Let's hear it for Daniel Perez.
Whatever you
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all. That was a great presentation, and
I want something, because a lot of people don't realize this, that Daniel has information about what was found up and around the hill. You remember? The footprints that were found.
what we're going to do is, Patty, is we're going to take a 10-minute break now, and during that time, anyone feel free to approach Daniel for questions and answers, and we intend to come back after that break with presentations from Cliff Berrickman and Scott McLean, and then have time for our lunch. So throughout the day in the celebration, very informal scheduling, but we don't want to go long now. We want to have time to get up, stretch our legs, and meet some of our friends who have arrived, and we'll continue on with that. So thank you. Daniel is here for Daniel Perez.